Thread podcast. In this episode, we talk to Tess Howard. Tess is a Great Britain and England professional hockey player with over 75 caps and a Commonwealth gold medal from Birmingham 2022. She's a current student of the London School of Economics and a published academic. She's also the founder and director of Inclusive Sportswear, which is leading the movement for rigorously inclusive sportswear policies for schools, brands, and national governing bodies. She's also the winner of the Sunday Times Sportswoman of the Year Changemaker Award 2023 and the Telegraph Top 50 Most Influential Women in Sport 2023. She describes herself as driven by passion, optimism, diligence, and resilience on colliding athletic, academic, activist, and entrepreneurial paths. In 2023, England Hockey made the decision to allow athletes to wear either a skirt or shorts during competition. Tess was fundamental to making these changes happen. International Hockey Federation followed up with the same regulations in June. In the podcast, we talk about all this and more, and why it's cool to be keen, and why she will always be a dance enthusiast.
Oh, thank you. What a lovely introduction. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but the triple A, surely.
Oh my goodness, I struggled to get that out. I might have to re-record that. But I wondered if you could give us a little more introduction about you and also about Inclusive Sportswear.
Yeah, because that's a introduction really of the last 2 years, which have been quite a successful time. But I'm 25 and I grew up in Cambridge, played rugby first, followed my older brother, and then I picked up a hockey stick around age of 10, 11, fell in love with the game, and my journey to get to here is probably falling in love with hockey and sport, but more generally, I have a love affair with feminism and how hockey, my position in the world, my platform, have all kind of collided together to this moment. I have a very deep rooted sort of, I don't know how to describe it other than I feel very responsible for the next generation, because I feel like we're on a continuum of women's rights and more generally around inclusion. And I'm so determined not to see the political sliding that we have right now. So wherever I am in my life, I feel like hopefully I can contribute to bettering that. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things to dive into. My hockey career itself has been up and down, and to get shorts for the women's hockey team has been extremely up and down. But it's just funny, you read it out like that. It's like, oh, it was all meant to be, but it really wasn't.
I mean, I kind of want to start with, where do you think that came from? You know, this kind of sense of internal drive to really make change. Is that something that you were kind of surrounded with when you were growing up, or what do you think has kind of given you that spirit to kind of go and do this?
Yeah, 100% my mum to begin with. She works tirelessly in conservation, so she almost single-handedly brought about a moratorium for deep sea mining in the government for UK, and she's been lobbying for a long time. Meanwhile, all of our dinner table discussions, she'd get home, in the evenings and whip up some amazing dish in 20 minutes, and then we would sit down and she'll tell us about her day. And she'd be, fighting with this mining company and talking to that government, really inspiring me as a young person. And actually, my first thing that I did, I really always wanted to study geography, but I really wanted to start a sustainability group at my school because there wasn't one. And so I created the Green Team, which was all of 2 people.
Love that.
And my first thing was that we didn't have recycling bins in our school. So I went to the deputy head and said, like, surely we need some recycling bins. So it's like, okay, yeah, sure. Good idea. Let's get some recycling bins. And then after school one day, I just saw the cleaners putting all of the recycling stuff into the normal bins. And I went back to the deputy head. I was like, they're not separating recycling, so it means nothing. And he said that there was no obligation for them to recycle. So whilst, it's not the cleaners' jobs to recycle. And so he said, if you want the recycling to happen, you're going to have to empty the bins every Friday. And so my friends soon became the disposal team of paper. But what I also did was place the bins different places in the classrooms, and I did like sort of an experiment. If I put the recycling bin next to the normal bin, then when people went to the bin with whatever they had the choice right there and then. But if they had to move across the classroom to, they arrive at one bin, it wasn't the right bin, they were just going to use that anyway. So when I was going around the classrooms with my dwindling friendship group, because Friday lunchtime was not a time that you wanted to go and empty bins, but I think those sorts of experiences when I was young really influenced me. I was also part of the Scouts, and I was the first female head of Scouts for my school, which was really exciting. And at the time, I didn't really know why it was a big deal, but my school were the first, my age group, when I went to my school, the Perse in year 7, it was the first time they'd brought in girls. So it only took them 4 years to have me as their first head of Scouts, which I think was really cool, given that Scouts is often quite a masculine dominated area. And I think it was all kind of maybe the combination of those things. But I think so I would say my mum, that experience of leadership in Scouts, and also because I was the leader, I had to talk in front of 150 people about what we were doing that day, trying to inspire them from age 12 to 15, and I was 15 at the time, planning summer camps and things like that. So my organizational skills from a young age were like really, really put to the test, and I had to lead a team of students. But I think my school itself, I was very lucky to go to a very good independent school in Cambridge, and it was different in the fact that there wasn't really that sense of entitlement in the school, which I think a lot of independent schools have. There was a sense of imagine how much you could learn because this is what we are providing for you. And very early on, what I should mention is that my dad had to move to Bahrain for work when I was 12. And so I had my secondary school without him, and that kind of put a lot of strain on our family. But it was so that he could send us to this school. And so I saw my schooling, my learning, as the biggest opportunity to almost pay him back for not being with us. My parents are no longer together, but that sacrifice that he made, my mum's sacrifices that she made every day when she was going and fighting, I think give me a sense of duty to use what I've been given.
I mean, I think there's so much in there, Tess. I'm hugely passionate about education and making sure that education really empowers, because a lot of education doesn't necessarily do that. But it sounds like, you were somewhere that kind of really removed barriers for you, and it kind of instilled in you a sense of, we can do this. And you were kind of given the opportunity, but also given the responsibility of those repercussions of saying, yeah, you can do this, but if you're going to do it, you're the one who's got to empty the bins. And a lot of people might not have taken that challenge, where they kind of thought, yeah, I'm not going to do this on a Friday. But I also think having that role model within your mum has really shown you what you can achieve. And I think role modeling is so important. And, I see you as a role model for the next generation. And I wonder how you feel about that. Is that a role that you're comfortable with, or is it just something that you kind of take for granted because you've seen it?
No, I think role modeling is really interesting, because I think as soon as you think you're a more role model, you might change what you do. And I think I've managed to be where I am now through hopefully being my authentic self. And my experiences have been, starting when I was, let's say, 14, and being a role model to the year 7s, because I was out on the Astro at lunchtimes, playing as much as I could. And then me and my best friend, we were trying to raise money for our school trip to Berlin, and we offered in an auction of promises, we offered coaching from us, to 14-year-olds, and two year 7 mums, mums of year 7 girls, bought it for them. And so me and my best friend Ellie went out for 10 lunchtimes during the first term with these 2 little girls, who were 11, and they absolutely loved it. And her and I, loved that sort of relationship. And then we would see them around school, and because we were a bit older, they'd wave at us. And I think naturally that sort of responsibility is sat really nicely with me. I'm an older sister of a younger brother. He's 6 years younger, and when he came along, I was like, right, he is mine. Like, I will look after him. I will play with him. So much as he was my doll at sometimes, but I have a very strong relationship with my little brother. A lot of protecting him, but I think more generally, I'm protective of those young kids who don't quite fit in, because I've said here that I had a lot of opportunities, but I was the fact that I created a green team kind of sums up that I wasn't necessarily the popular kid at school, but at the same time, I didn't need to have popularity, and I didn't need to have these stereotypical things. I was so happy being head of scouts, being on the Astro every lunchtime with whoever wanted to join me that day. If no one, then I just listened to music and it'd be fine. I was part of all different clubs. Or even just you said dance enthusiast at the beginning. One of my best friends has nothing to do with hockey, and we would go and do dancing and stuff like that, just very random. But I'm quite happy to just be myself. And when I see young girls who are trying to figure out their place, or anybody really, I feel very protected over those kids, because I want them to know that they just need to be themselves. So when I've done this short, all the stuff with the shorts, and I get messages from, mostly it's quirky girls. When I say quirky, I mean people who kind of know themselves a bit more than I'd say the stereotypical like under 14 girls who just sort of do what they're told. And I feel extremely proud that I can give them an avenue to express themselves, but also they can see me expressing myself. And I do try and check myself, because I have have a certain platform now, and I don't want people to think that just happened, and that you had to go through a lot of self-discovery and hard times to find your voice. And now I use my voice because I found it, not because I feel like I always had to. But it's on a bigger scale. But it was always been a quite small scale. So to answer your question, I really enjoy it, because I feel like it could be something different to what people get to see mostly.
This idea of also your lived experience and how that has informed the work that you do at Inclusive Sportswear, and also that idea of the entrepreneurial spirit as well, where you talked about kind of auctioning off coaching lessons, so kind of bringing these two things together, and how that's really kind of led to your work in Inclusive Sportswear, and exactly what that is and what you're doing there.
I think my lived experience of why I created Inclusive Sportswear is kind of huge amount of colliding paths that have come together. I think the first reason I felt like I had to do something, and if I look back on what my childhood was, is probably the school attitude that you can do anything, and then it's cool to be keen. Cool to be keen is a phrase that I don't think they use, but it's definitely the ethos of the school. And things that were celebrated at the school were, maths champions, and people who were doing chess, and but at the same time, the hockey team and music and drama. So everything was celebrated, but at the bedrock of it was this expectation of academics. And when I say expectation, it was not that you were forced to have to do certain academics. It was that you were the expectation was that you applied yourself, and the narrative was that if you applied yourself, you would do well, because these are things that are in your control, in terms of being able to, in terms of application is in your control, not necessarily your natural talent for certain things. And so when I joined the Purse, when I joined in year 7, and I was really unacademic when I joined. My dad had to tutor me in maths for about 6 months just to get into the school. I couldn't spell. I still can't really spell, but I don't need to spell now that they're laptops. But I think in my interview, what got me into the school, I mean, despite the fact that they also were taking in girls for the first time, so like, we'll take anyone, but they asked me, what would you rather be doing right now than this interview? And I was like, I think I'd rather be playing hockey. Very honest. But when I was at the school, that sort of, you can do anything if you put your mind to it, was something that I really, really latched onto. And I think it's very rare for someone who probably really, really struggled in year 6 and, in my previous school, to then being in the bottom sets for maths and to go on. And I eventually achieved A star in maths, A level. And so that journey for me, that's probably one of my biggest achievements. You read out, but I was like, well, make sure she reads out maths A star A level, because that took a lot of work. But that was pure, I had to get myself into a headspace of pure logic, and I'm very expressive. I'm very soft, but at the same time, I have a lot of hard logical skills that have been built up through school. And so people always said, "Oh, GCSEs were easy." I was like, "No, GCSEs were extremely hard for me, but I really wanted to do well, and just kept surprising myself." And I think, if you're linked to like why I started Inclusive Sportswear, is also I want to see if I can do it, and very fortunate to have some incredible advisors like yourself. But I have an entrepreneurial cousin. She's called Libby. I went to visit her in Paris when I was 16, and that was a hugely informative trip for me, because she built a company that does crowdfunding for the Kenyan diaspora. Very niche, but extremely entrepreneurial. And I actually had this idea for Inclusive Sportswear for maybe a couple years, and I went to visit her in South Africa a year ago, and she was like, "Oh, so how's it going with Inclusive Sportswear?" And this is before we had launched. This was 2021 or 2022, sorry, after the Commonwealth Games. And I was like, "I haven't really done that much." And she was like, "Do you want it to be a thing?" And it really, really did. And so she kind of inspires me to have that entrepreneurial spirit. The school inspired me to believe that I could do anything that I wanted to do. And I think my mum and dad definitely back any like decisions that I make. And so my dad still, he's just, my mum and dad, they've never been pushy parents. They've just been like, what could you do if you applied yourself? And I think that sort of attitude. So that's one of the reasons. But I mean, it's not the reason it's not the founding reason, but it's contributed to why I think I can do it, which is probably a thing that not many young women have, or have had for. I think it's definitely increasing, but there is a natural confidence that boys get brought up with, and I was fortunate not to have had the reverse, but a sort of an enhanced, constant proving to myself of what I could do. And I do think, hockey has had a massive part in that. If I hadn't have found my place on the hockey pitch, I would not have found any of my other confidence to do anything else, because hockey was always my place where I would go, and it was completely calm and safe. And I felt like I could just be my complete self there. And if I think about all the skills that I've learned from hockey, the self-mastery, the discipline, the organization, in the mornings when I was 12, I had this big whiteboard in my room, and I would write out my day the night before, and then in the morning I would go in and I would make sure I got everything ready. And I'm a bit like, I would love to be organized, but I often joke that with my best friends that I'm organized chaos, because I'm extremely organized, but then sometimes my delivery can be a bit chaotic because I'm so expressive. But yeah, getting onto the whole how Inclusive Sportswear happened, you have to appreciate the hard journey of my hockey career, and then getting to the stage where I just couldn't wear a skort anymore.
And so tell us about that, because you had an injury. Is that right? And that's how kind of this came about. And, what you've done in terms of changing the policy and really making change is quite groundbreaking, you know, and for you to be the first one to do it, that nobody's kind of challenged this before, I find that amazing. So tell us a bit more about kind of the stats to do with, you know, the way that girls drop out because of kit and why you felt you needed to do it.
Well, it was quite shocking for me because I came from a school that encouraged sport. I myself extremely active as a professional athlete. And so I started doing my research for my dissertation into, well, to begin with, it was to do with gendered school uniforms. It had nothing to do with sport. And so I studied geography at Durham, and I was going deep into gender segregation of uniforms because, and I think in my second year, I had this massive awakening of feminist consciousness, and I read pretty much all, you know, all the authors I could, and it was like a light bulb had just gone on my head, which is quite a nice. I mean, is it problematic? I don't know. I didn't really understand gender discrimination growing up, which is fantastic. I mean, now I look back, there was definitely moments like the fact that I can continue to play rugby because I was a girl. I mean, I only, you know, in the last few years realized that that was discrimination. But I was quite sheltered, and so actually having the opportunity to dive into the theoretical side and then also looking at what the actual reality is in the UK. And, you know, I grew up wearing a gendered uniform, but I didn't know that, you know, they didn't have an effect on me there and then because I thought it was what you had to do as a girl. But all of this is sort of like unconsciously conditioning girls to be a certain way. And because I wasn't a certain way because of my, you know, parents encouraging me to be who I want, the uniform didn't put a barrier on what I did. I still just changed into shorts and ran out and played football with the boys, those sorts of things. But I had to, you know, change the way I operated. But I think the biggest thing for me was that gender coding still existed right now. And so my big question with hockey and with school uniforms and school sport uniforms was, okay, I understand the legacy of it. That's the why. That's the why we still have skirts to play sport in. But why is it still now? And then those reasons are what are the reasons that I care about most. If it is, and this is where I ended up having my dissertation, I asked, gendered school sport uniforms, are they practical, professional, or patriarchal? So my question was, okay, it's going to be quite obvious that they've come from a legacy of patriarchy, but right now, is the policy practical or is it patriarchal? And it was the latter. Spoilers alert. But going into it, I went deep into the legacy of these uniforms, and then I added sort of all the different geographical elements that I am kind of, you know, very geeky about, like what it does to body comportment. That's, you know, how your body feels, what it does to body consciousness and body image, and then more generally, so that's sort of like a corporeal body element, but for society, what does it do to it? What does segregating gender from age 5 do to school settings, sport settings, and then more generally as these kids move into adulthood, how is that ingrained in their brains? And so it was multiple layers, psychological, physiological, you know, policy-based, but it all came to this final conclusion, which was I had now gathered the information that 70% of women had seen girls drop out of sport because of sports kit and body image concerns. So that is, you know, a lot of women saying that they've seen a girl drop out because of sports kit. And because of my ethics, I couldn't go into schools and talk to girls there and then. So I had 400 surveys from 18 to 60. And the frightening thing was that the top end of the age bracket really kind of matched what the lower end was saying. And there just clearly had not been any evolution of it. And given that I'm a doer, I sort of wondered why that was just the case. So I went into the government policy, and at the time it changed after a couple of years, but it still has legacies of it. At the time it said that schools could determine if girls could wear trousers or not. It said that, and it currently still says that dress differences between boys and girls are standard. Yet all of the school uniform is non-statutory. So it means that schools have no obligation to follow any guidelines. They just get given guidance from the government, but they get given what they have to do is apply the Equality Act, which says you must not discriminate based on race, gender, sex, gender orientation, religion, disability. Yet you have a continual policies, majority of policies still segregate on the basis of gender. So my question of why, it was really difficult for me to figure out a way, and I had many mind maps and just everything was up in the air. I was trying to find a way to distill all of this. If girls are dropping out of sport because of sports kit, there's this huge issue of gendering uniforms because they're sexualizing young girls. They're making them feel a certain way when they're 5 years old. They're not allowed to, they can't physically go and run around and do cartwheels because people are saying that the pants will show when they cartwheel and things like that. So all of these issues. But if I went down a line of this is not the feminist thing to do, you're discriminating against women, all the ears would shut off because, unfortunately, that's not an argument that wins very much. And so I have a few people who I really look up to, and I got really obsessed with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I watched all of the documentaries of her, how she kind of changed the policy. And it's very, very different, obviously, scale-wise, but how she overturned and created a precedent of gender discrimination by using a male case instead of a female case. So she was very smart in that way in the US as Supreme Court Justice. Well, at the time she was just a lawyer and then became Supreme Court Justice. But the reason why I'm so inspired by her is because she used the system against itself. And I kind of wanted to do the same for sports and school. So I decided that the best way for me to conclude all of this research, which was so heavy from so many different aspects, is to boil it down really simply to not actually touching the Equality Act at all. I don't touch that in my conclusion. I say this is about enabling participation and enjoyment in sport for girls. And one of the key ways that you can do that is stop or reduce their gendered school uniforms and offer them choice. And so choice became the massive buzzword. And those two things there, enable participation and offer choice, have been sort of the buzzwords that have led me to move my dissertation from school sport uniforms into a much bigger conversation around women's sport and then my own sport. And I think the final thing to say is on my research was that I found that 60% of the girls or the women wanted to wear shorts at school but didn't have the option. And at the same time, I'm battling my own sport. So these things are going on in tandem. And you mentioned I had an injury. Well, I did my dissertation and I finished it a week before I ruptured my ACL, which was 3 months before the Tokyo Olympics. And this was all very sort of, now I look back at it, it's like somebody's written the script for me. But I had a year where I couldn't play my sport. And so all that was going on in my head was what matters to me now that I can't play my sport. And I had put all of my eggs into going to Tokyo. Like I thought that would complete me as a person. I thought it was my, my calling, if you like. But I realized that hockey should have only ever been for me to enjoy it because it's such a beautiful outlet for me. And then I flip it around and I think about what I could do with my dissertation. And there's a hilarious video of me in the garden when I've just submitted my dissertation with a knee brace on, and I'm saying to my mum in some sort of, I feel like I'm on a press, like I got press in front of me, and I'm saying this dissertation will make change. I promise you it. And plus some other like feminist stuff. And she was like, well, that was quite aggressive. And I was like, no, I'm passionate, mum. This will make change. But, I thought it would make change, but I didn't think it would have this much. And I was fortunate that that it got 94%, and so then it was encouraged by my professors to publish it. I had worked really hard on it, but I was shocked because I had taken some risks in the dissertation. I'd made it more original than perhaps others had been, and I'd gone into a lot of detail. So then during my time away from hockey, I had times where I got very, very low and stopped working altogether. But one of the things that really kept me going during my rehab was this idea that I could make my platform in hockey do something, and if that was going to be, well, and what would that be for me? And so now I feel like it's appropriate just to zoom out and think that that's going on from an academic point of view. From an athletic point of view, I am battling rehab for a year to get my ACL back. But at the same time, I am 16 months away. When I ruptured my ACL, I'm 16 months away from the Commonwealth Games and the World Cup, some huge tournaments. And so my dream was to go to them, and I very fortunately was part of the team that's won the Commonwealth Games for the first time in our history, which was pretty amazing. And don't want to talk to me about the conflicts of being part of the Commonwealth Games, because as a geographer and as a political thinker, that is, there's a lot of contradictions. But for what the tournament was, if you can just take it as it is, as a tournament of nations, remove all of the British Empire from it, it was a very enjoyable tournament. But at the end of it, I was really, really uncomfortable because I was fortunate to be the one that scored the winning goal, which meant that my face was over a lot of, and my body scoring that goal was on a lot of newspapers. And the thing is that I had been really battling self-consciousness or body consciousness for a long time. So ever since I joined the program when I was 19, joined the senior team. And so all of these things are colliding. I'm trying to figure out why I'm so uncomfortable in the uniform that we were wearing, which was a skirt and a vest, when I was so comfortable wearing shorts and a t-shirt to train. And so all of these things collide, and I realized that I have always wanted to wear shorts, but now I finally had been through an injury that said to me, like, what do you want to do? I had been through the research, and I felt like everything was in my hands and I had to do something about it. And I think the thing that kind of pushed me over the line was that I was now using my research, and I wrote an opinion piece in the Telegraph that pretty much no one read. But I thought that this piece was going to change school regulation. It said that, it basically cited all the stuff that I'd found, and it was like from an England hockey player, but no one cared. And so I knew I had to publish my research because then it would be fact. I had to create a hockey movement so that people would understand that this was something that could happen. But I also had to put everything in place, policy, what the shorts actually would look like with skirts, and the team aspect of getting the whole team behind it. So these three strands, and everything else, I'm making sure that I kept playing hockey, because if I wasn't part of the team, then it was going to mean nothing, because my teammates who wanted to wear shorts weren't going to wear shorts unless I did. And now, I don't know if listeners are being like, oh, why do you want to wear shorts? Well, we train in shorts every day. We play in skirts. It was the same question. Are we playing in skirts because they are practical or because they're professional? And my answer would be, well, if they were practical, then the men would wear them. And if they were practical, we'd wear them for training. And the vest tops themselves, if they were practical, we would wear them for training. And we don't, because they are compression tank tops, and nobody freaking wants to wear a compression tank top. So many, many different strands going on to a stage where we enter 2023, sorry. And I'm like, okay, let's go. And then I'm like, but this can't be just for my sport. So I better have a solution for policy across schools, other sports, NGBs, and the brands need to get involved. So I was like, okay, we've got to have some sort of place for all of this. And I wanted that to be inclusive sportswear.
Amazing, Tess. I feel like you're not a person who does things by halves. You know, we caught up at the weekend, and like you have so many balls that you juggle. Like you are training currently for the Paris Olympics. You're preparing for the official launch of Inclusive Sportswear. You know, how do you do it all? What kind of drives you to kind of keep that balance, and do you manage to keep that balance?
Yeah, I do because I have a lot of uh, outlets. I think I'm not serious the whole time. I've fortunately have a very humorous personality, and so all I really need to start the day is watching some comedy on Instagram Reels, and I'm like sort of relaxed. But no, I mean that aside, like I how I do it all and why I do it all are questions that I don't really ask myself because I just do. And it's something I've always done. Balancing academics and being an athlete has been something I've done since I was 14. Just to touch on my own hockey journey, I went from under 16s to the senior team and having my debut at 19 within 3 years. And that rise was only because I loved it. And I caveat everything that I've done, everything that you've said with, I only do it because I love it. And that is my drive. So what brings me the most joy? Things like being part of my hockey team and striving for something greater than ourselves in terms of what we can do by being a team that wear shorts and scores at Paris. But also, I love playing hockey. And so these two, I would call them colliding passions of wanting to make change and bettering in my own small part of the world. And that might be the hockey world, that might be sports kit. It might be a little girl who's, gets to wear shorts for the first time. But at the same time, like the way I feed all of that is making sure I feed my passions. And so being able to play hockey every day is an absolute privilege. Of course, there are really hard things, but I don't think I would have ever imagined that I wanted. Well, I didn't want to be a senior hockey player. I fell into it because I thought there's nothing actually greater. And when I got offered my contract at age 19, it was at the time before COVID. It was 18 months to Tokyo, and I had a very good chance. And I thought, I can't lose this opportunity. And I don't know. I went to see Hamilton when I was traveling in New York with my dad after the Olympic qualifiers, after we qualified. And there's a line in there which says, "I'm not throwing away my shot." And that really, really resonates with me. I also just think the whole narrative of being the own maker of your future is something that I'm quite philosophical. I'm quite spiritual, not in any sense of a religion, but just in terms of I feel like I have something to give the world, and I'm fortunate that I'm surrounded by amazing people who back this crazy ambition of mine, which it doesn't necessarily have any boundaries on it, but in the small sense of it, to be able to make hockey better for when I leave it is something that really drives me. That's from both a hockey aspect of like actually performing well and getting Great Britain and England back to what is my role in the team there, but then also more generally. But I mean, yeah, sometimes I do. Sometimes people do say like, "Oh my gosh, wow!" But really, for me, it's not at all because it's just really enjoyable, and I just feel very fortunate. And I also think it goes back to like the why and the why now. I always asked myself with the shorts, if not me, who, and if not now, when. And that's a really powerful quote from somebody else. But I continuously asked myself. I knew that if I didn't do it, I would never wear shorts, and I could not live in a world that happened.
Oh my goodness, I could talk to you all day. I've got like a list of questions still to go, but I think we're going to have to wrap it up for today. But oh my goodness, what an amazing conversation! And I'd always had feedback that it was very difficult as an athlete to make change because of the conflict of interest that sometimes arises from things like sponsorship. But what I really hear from you is the fact that this is a very intrinsic motivation. Almost you can't not do this. And so I think that's a really important lesson for all of us, that actually you've got to follow that kind of inner drive. You've got to follow that calling. And if you do, not only will it fulfill you, but you'll be able just to drive that change, because it's something that you almost cannot do. But yeah, thank you so much, Tess. It's been such an amazing conversation. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Good luck for the future Olympics, and I'm sure we'll speak again.
Thanks. Please have me back for more.
I will. I've got a whole load of questions about you being an eco athlete, so don't you worry. There'll be another episode with Tess in a future series. But yeah, I think it's so important to get your point of view on something that affects you every day, like kit, but in some ways that you have such little control over as the athlete. You're given your kit, and I think unless you had done it, like you said, there wouldn't have been any change. And I think a lot of people in the future will look to you and be like, that was so groundbreaking, and how amazing the work that you've done and what legacy you've created.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Thank you very much, Tess.